Well, the 2020 election is going to be epic. On one side, we have the incumbent president who has boosted the economy and actually made America greater than it was under the disastrous Obama administration. And on the other side, we have Uncle Joe, who loves to fondle his entourage and at one time confused his wife and sister.
They don't call Super Tuesday for nothing. By the way, this is my little sister Valerie, and I'm Jill's husband. Oh no, this is you switched on me. This is my wife, this is my sister. They switched on me.
Happy days. The presumptive Democratic nominee isn't even in office, and to be fair, when November 2020 comes around, there's little chance he'll actually get the keys to the Oval Office. But he's already laying out his major plan to reopen America, which is currently at a standstill due to obvious current events. We're only in April, people, and after a few months of lockdown, some European countries are showing signs of recovery regarding death rates, with France and Italy reporting fewer deaths over the past days. Given Trump's current plans on how to deal with the problem, and additional equipment being allocated to healthcare establishments, we can only hope that the current crisis will be dealt with in a few months. But that didn't stop Uncle Joe, who recently published an article for the New York Times entitled "My Plan to Safely Reopen America." That's right, he has a plan. Right off the bat, I wondered to myself if social distancing has been a challenge for good old Joe, given that whenever he's with other people, whatever their age, he just can't seem to keep his hands to himself. He's so delusional that he's written his own piece to explain to all Americans, Democrats, Republicans, and everyone in between, what steps he would take to bring the US economy out of the darkness and back to normalcy. This, of course, also coming from the man who quite clearly isn't in the best mental state, and I say that lovingly. Several articles have commented upon his clear cognitive decline, with some questioning how he'd be able to properly lead the country and command the White House for 4 whole years. That is, until he touches someone a bit too much and impeachment is brought up again. We can only hope. In a recent article by The Intercept, they state that prior to Joe Biden's massive victory in the South Carolina primary and his even more impressive Super Tuesday showing, many viewed his candidacy as all but dead. A 4th place finish in Iowa was followed up by a 5th place finish in New Hampshire, causing the corporate donors on which he centrally relies to flee and his political obituaries to be widely written. But since then, he has consolidated his status as Democratic frontrunner, and, as is customary, he is receiving far greater attention than previously, particularly on the question most on the minds of Democratic voters, his electability against Trump. And one of the towering questions in that regard is his cognitive fitness. It is visible to the naked eye that the 77-year-old 6-term senator and 2-term vice president is in serious cognitive decline. The problem with all of this, aside from the fact that Biden's cognitive decline is visible to the naked eye and it is incredibly reckless and repressive to demand that it be suppressed, these concerns were first raised not by Trump operatives, nor by Sanders supporters, nor were they first raised within the last several weeks. Quite the opposite is true. They were raised repeatedly over the last year, principally by Democratic Party officials and their most loyal allies in the media. One of the most explicit and direct attacks on Biden's cognitive fitness to run for president and to serve came from Democratic Senator Cory Booker, now a Biden endorser. After a CNN presidential debate in September, in which Biden had bizarrely rambled about how the key to solving the problems in African American communities was having parents play the record player for their children, and during which Castro had pointedly accused Biden of having forgotten what he had just said moments earlier, Booker unflinchingly suggested Biden lacked the ability to endure the rigours of the campaign. I mean, even Democrats themselves are left scratching their heads when Biden's bizarre ramblings are brought up, and they know that this will inevitably be brought up even more as the November elections get closer. I mean, the thought of progressive Bernie in the White House was terrifying because, let's face it, who would want to turn the US into a socialist haven like Venezuela has been in the past few years? But at least he's coherent enough and can string sentences together intelligently. In another article about Biden's mental state, the New York Post said, "There's much talk online, especially among Bernie Sanders supporters, about whether Joe Biden is in cognitive decline, whether he has dementia, and why he's so incoherent," Al Jazeera pundit and Sanders Uber fan Mehdi Hassan said in a video dating March 9th. Now, I'm no doctor, I'm not going to make a medical diagnosis, apart from to say that in terms of his speech and his memory, there has clearly been a lot of decline in recent years. But back to Joe Biden and his beautifully written plan to help Americans across the nation get back on their feet. And you know that you can trust Uncle Joe because he's been clear, straightforward, and has never backtracked on any policy he stood for during his whole political career. I mean, look at that face, the expression, the hope of millions of Democrats. Or is that just his "have I left the oven on again" face? Who knows? He starts off by saying, "People across America are stepping up to the plate. Millions are performing essential services at great personal risk, and millions more are staying at home, away from friends and extended family. In return, they want the answer to a simple question. What is the plan to safely reopen America? So far, the Trump administration hasn't supplied an answer." Well, I mean, that isn't entirely true. I mean, if you go on the White House website, it even has a whole list of what Trump has been actively doing to help during the current crisis. There have been restrictions to travel to and from the United States to contain the virus. He announced an economic assistance package to help support businesses and workers who have been harmed by the outbreak. He'll be instructing the Department of the Treasury to defer tax payments for certain individuals and businesses negatively impacted by the coronavirus, which will provide more than $200 billion of additional liquidity to the economy. The Trump administration declared a public health emergency in January to bolster response efforts. And remember, like I said many times, this is also because of the World Health Organization delaying actually telling us how deadly this pandemic was, because they were basically under the influence of Beijing, but no surprise there. The President directed his administration to make general use face masks available to all healthcare workers. He signed into law more than $8 billion to fund response efforts, and more than 1 million tests have been distributed nationwide. Testing is now available in every state lab in the country, and commercial labs are now deploying tests, which will help generate a dramatic increase in availability. And the administration has announced that health plans with health savings accounts will be able to cover coronavirus testing and treatment without co-payments. You also have to take into account all these new press briefings because the situation is evolving so rapidly, but I guess that slipped Joe's mind, like a lot of things. Did someone say cognitive decline? Joe continues, "If I were president, I would convene top experts from the private sector, industry by industry, to come up with new ideas on how to operate more safely. Perhaps offices and factories will need to space out workers and pursue other solutions to lessen risk of spread of the virus on the job. Restaurants may need new layouts with diners farther apart. From my talk with some industry leaders, I know that many are already at work on these questions. Mr. Trump needs to accelerate this thinking and make sure it is available to all businesses, including small businesses, not just the largest companies. Joe, you can touch as many people as you want. You are not the current president, and here's hoping you won't be come November. No one can accurately predict the toll that a pandemic can have on economies or countries in general, and personally I think the president is doing the best he can given the circumstances. But in this era of Trump bashing, where most people get their news from biased left-wing news outlets, it's no surprise that everything the president does nowadays is shown in a bad light because Orange Man bad. The economy has already taken a major hit, but now you're saying that manufacturing and other industry sectors now have to spend even more to prevent the crisis from deepening, and that's hoping that businesses who have since shut their doors will still be able to stay afloat given all the lost revenue. You even say that some are already at work on these questions, yet Trump needs to accelerate this thinking? Trump can only do so much. It's like lockdown measures. You can enforce them all you want, but at the end of the day you're still going to have idiots who will flout the rules with complete disregard for other people. Joe concludes, "As we prepare to reopen America, we have to remember what this crisis has taught us. The administration's failure to plan, prepare, to honestly assess and communicate the threat to the nation led to catastrophic results. We cannot repeat those mistakes. We know what we have to do. We have the tools, expertise, and now hard-won experience. The American people have already paid too high a price in illness, death, and economic loss. This time, the White House has to get it right." What are you smoking, Joe? We were all lied to for months by the World Health Organization and China. How could we have properly prepared for this? I'm honestly wondering if this is your dementia kicking in or if you're just plain stupid. But then again, sadly for Democrats, you'll still be praised by most media as the man America needs to combat the current pandemic. The US has the tools and expertise, I'll give you that. But the White House can only get it right when the information is properly relayed by international sources and other countries. And there's only so much the administration can do as the crisis continues to unfold. Now, go back to your cave and touch some more people. Good, Joe.